Yeezy season approaching. Hello and welcome to the Minority Arts Appreciation Society podcast, where we're ticking all the boxes. I'm Josh and I lead the music reviews.
I'm Mattie and I lead the film discussion.
Yeah, if you want to keep up with all of our latest antics, feel free to follow us on Twitter, Instagram, at Minority Arts Podcast. Today we're talking about Yeezus by Kanye West, a final chapter of the dark fantasy trilogy, this heightened manic end to this moment in Kanye's career. I would like to give some context before we start this. Obviously, this was a really divisive album. Some critics really lauded it, and some famously loathed it. It did well, as Kanye always seems to do, no matter what risk he takes, debuting at #1 in the Billboards. This is his 6th album to do so. After the album was done, Kanye spent 15 days with Rick Rubin, stripping it down for a more minimalist, raw sound. You know, he's always been a perfectionist and is always toying around with his work, even after it's released, as we saw with The Life of Pablo. And the tour for this album was also notable. He toured with Kendrick back, young Kendrick, just after he'd really put out Good Kid, Mad City. And it was a really insanely ambitious tour with mask and crazy stage setups. You can find online videos of this. There's layered stage imagery directly lifted from the film Holy Mountain. I haven't seen that film, but yeah, it's a film. It's arty. I hear the kids like it nowadays, and it's actually, it looks like a really cool tour. He would really fly off the handle at these concerts, and go on huge rambly rants and leave after 3 songs. Greenberg from Forks described these shows as overwrought and uncomfortable. And I think this kind of disquieting energy is really interesting context for this album, and it was very present in all of his media appearances. You have the Sway interview, How Sway, and he'd always fly off the handle in interviews, always going these huge rants and about being a god and trying to explain what he meant by that. And I really feel like this is a very manic time for Kanye in his personal life, and it really comes off. It always comes up in all of his media presence. What's interesting about the aesthetic direction this album goes in, where 60s pop art was Kanye's inspiration for 808s, early 19th century minimalist architecture is what Kanye cites as inspiring him for this album. He specifically talks about a lamp by Le Corbusier, as well as that man's house designs. And this is an architecture I'm going to pretend to be very familiar with next time I hang out with architecture students, and I just want them to think I'm cool so badly. But yeah, anyway, I think this shows off in the album with kind of the very sleek, sterile production, and this album's constantly jutting style. He also says he was inspired by kind of 80s house music going into this album. Really interestingly, in the last year, it was revealed that this album was originally going to be titled "Thank God for Drugs," which would have been a perfect title for this album. Although I do love the Yeezus title, I will not knock the Yeezus title.
I wouldn't have it any other way.
Yeah. Sonically, Kanye set out for this album to undermine the commercial. He really wanted to shake everything up. Velocities in music, who sadly they don't really make videos anymore, but they have really cool Yeezus review, and they talked about how they felt like this was kind of Kanye's Kid A, in the sense that he was really digging the noisier parts of rap happening, stuff like Death Grips, and he just wanted to drag the mainstream through that and into a more abrasive, interesting place. And I think with kind of mainstream hip hop that came after this in the 2010s, I think we did see some of that. We saw lots of crazy experimental risk takers in the mainstream scene, which is really cool. I love this album, hate this album. I think I really like that Kanye brought that conversation to the mainstream. Normally, I ask Mattie what her history of the album is, and I will do that, but I'd like to touch on my history a little bit. I'm worried about this podcast. I don't know what Maddie thinks about this album, and I don't want to come off as contrarian. But yeah, when I first heard this album, I really hated it. I thought it was really dumb, shallow, obnoxious. I didn't like this album at all. And I felt that way for years. Then I went on holiday with a good friend of mine I don't want to expose their personality, so I'll call them Borge. That that is an adequate. That's an adequate covering. And yeah, we were in Spain, and he was like, I think I casually expressed I didn't like Yeezus, and he was like, I actually really enjoyed that album. And I was like, why? And he's like, that album's fucking crazy, dude. It's really cool. And then I don't know, he took me up to like this kind of, we snuck onto like the roof of like a restaurant. Yeah, we listened to the whole album like on that roof. And like in that moment, it just clicked with me like how much fun you could have this album, and maybe I was being a bit too self-serious. And yeah, he said this really funny thing about, yeah, just imagine me like 14 years old stuck in Spain with my family, just like angsty listening to this album on its roof. Yeah, it really clicked for me. And yeah, so that was an interesting moment in my history of this album. That was when I was like 16. Anyway, Mattie, what's your experience with this album? History with this album, rather? What expectations did you have going into it? I'm curious to know.
Yeah, I actually went into it with the expectations that George set out for you when you discovered that you could enjoy this album. I was familiar with song. Honestly, I think this might be the Kanye album where I know the most singles from it so far, which is insane, right? But I think it's easy to forget about how big of a deal this was, you know? I think especially like I Am a God. I remember that was over like a bunch of like Call of Duty adverts. They really, really had their marketing down during that time.
Black Skinhead is constantly using adverts. Those drums I always hear on like car adverts and shit.
Yeah, you're so right. Like fucking VW Golfs. Yeah. Anyway, yeah. So, I kind of knew what I was getting in for. Honestly, some of the most potentially the most I have sonically for any Kanye album. Whether or not I got what I expected, I mean, it's pretty obvious I did, because there's such a, this album is manic, but it is consistent in its maniacism. Yeah, I haven't heard this album before. Yeah, I remember you not liking this. I remember you having a storied hatred for this.
Yeah. I'm going to come out and say my opinion in a second. I'll leave the audience in anticipation a little bit longer. My first memory of starting to think maybe this is a good album is I was a huge Lorde fan when I was like 14, 15.
That was not where I expected that to go.
She was like doing a concert and she was like, guys, I really love Kanye. I can't do the accent. She was like, I really love Kanye. I'm going to cover Hold My Liquor. I think it's a beautiful song. And I thought it was really gorgeous. She sung out like the rap verse. She changed the N word to the B word. I found it really moving. And I was like, God, maybe there's more going on in this album than meets the eye. And I think that's exactly how I feel about this album. I think simultaneously, this album is the other side of the coin of 808s and Heartbreaks. This is the cold persona that is forged in that album. And also, in my opinion, this album does everything that my beautiful Dark Twisted Fantasy is trying to do better, in every single way, honestly. I think what I completely adore this album. This is, I think this album's genius. I think it's so brazenly and obviously stupid that it can't be anything but genius. And I think one thing I really adore about this album is how it's okay. I'm serious, guys. I'm serious.
I promise. Yeah.
I love how unpretentious, how simultaneously pretentious and unpretentious this album is. When you have the context of the stage shows that came with this album, you know he's trying to say something deeper than normal braggadocious rap shit, right? But when you've just listened to this album, it really just feels like, oh, he's just being obnoxious, just bragging, whatever. But And the album's kind of not trying to tell you it's anything more than that. It gives you no album cover. It's not trying to give you this crazy art thing. It's just throwing it at you. It comes out on site, boom, and then just starts blurting shit about Yeezy season approaching. Fuck whatever you'll be hearing. Like, it's not trying to say, yo, I'm a composed artist like My Beautiful Dark Twisted Fantasy does. And that's the beauty of this album for me. This album sounds like a really rainy, cloudy, miserable day, and every now and then a beam of sunlight comes down through the clouds in these gorgeous soul samples that show up throughout the album, and they're immediately shuttered off. They're immediately tossed aside by these jutting industrial type sounds and horrible lyrics. And what I feel this album does is that it tricks you in the same way the last one did, but in a really good way, where it's like, this is just dumb, obviously. But it isn't. Like, in this album, there's constant themes of suppression, of drowning out old memories, of trying to reach for something more sincere and constantly shutting it off for like dumb shit. And when this album's vulgar, it does it in a way that's so enthusiastic and gross and goes so far that it becomes genuinely provocative. Where My Beautiful Dark Twisted Fantasy felt very casual in its vulgarity, it didn't feel like he was making a statement. That was just Kanye. Here, there are songs like I'm In It, which is like a sex ballad, I guess, is one of the least sexy songs I've heard. For example, Put My Fist in Her like a civil rights sign. And the moment where he says, I grabbed it with a slight grind, held it till the right time, then she came like, ah! It's so obviously trying to make you feel gross and uncomfortable. And finally, it feels like Kanye's saying something again. So I really love this album, and yeah, I guess that's how I feel it does what Dark Twisted Fantasy did a lot of, betraying this persona, but this one it feels very much like a real persona, and he's making a statement about it. And yeah, I adore this album.
Wow, where to begin? First of all, I'm going to say that my thoughts on this album haven't been as collected as you. Yeah, and there's a good reason for that. It's because I'm in love with this album's maniacism so far, and I'm absolutely reveling in its insanity. And I'm not sure that's a completely moral action, because Kanye is a mentally ill person, but I feel like there's an aspect of Kanye that wants you, like he's putting on a party, and he wants you to get to the most base part of your soul.
That's perfect. Base is the word for this album. I think I love that you use that word.
Thank you. So I think, yeah, you're right to point out the more heady themes of this album, but for me, I am getting so much out of the fucking guts of this album, and that's what it is. It's fucking guts. Like, it's nothing else. It's the innards, and it's so bare bones. Like, yeah, I obviously had a great time with this album. I think the way to pose the way I enjoy this album to you, Josh, would be, I said in the Life of Pablo review months ago, I was looking for like insanity and like a beauty in that, or not beauty in that, but just something interesting there. Whereas that album was weirdly long, and I find it really meandering, with a bunch of musical tangents that don't really go anywhere and don't do anything for me. This is 40 minutes long of exactly what I wanted from The Life of Pablo. I feel like this is Kanye focused again. Like you said, I feel like, I mean, it's his shortest album so far. And I feel like, God, I feel like this was a new direction for him that just got lost. Like, I think this is, I don't know, probably the most unique Kanye album. I mean, I haven't heard any projects going on from this, but
I think Jesus is King is unique in its own special way.
I forget about Jesus is King. Fuck, that completely blows it out of the water. But I think there's something there, definitely, of like, this, I feel like it's fascinating to me that he came back from this because while albums like The Life of Pablo and Ye are different from, Late Registration and his older works, there's, a familiarity to his sound. But here, this is uncharted territory, and I reveled in it.
Yeah, I think there's this narrative that Kanye is constantly innovating, and I don't think this is true. I think in 808s he innovates, and then there's loads of backlash, and he makes like a more generic rap album in My Beautiful Dark Twisted Fantasy, and I think that happens again with here, and going from this to Life of Pablo. I think Life of Pablo, he's very much conscious about how much people didn't like this album or thought it was weird and didn't get it, and he went and did a more conventional rap album, and
Yeah.
I think he tries to present himself as someone who's uncompromising, but I do think he compromises his vision and responds to how people are reacting to his album, and then makes something a bit more normal. Even anyway, yeah. I think one thing I dislike about the discourse around this album is I feel like lots of the time it's misrepresented as a really dumb album that doesn't know what it's doing. And
I
people
completely agree.
people will talk about it in such a self-serious way, and it's so obvious that this album has a sense of humor, and it's like so obviously making fun of celebrity as a concept. And Kanye is so in his head up being a celebrity at this point that he can do nothing but he simultaneously evangelizes himself in a very sincere way, while also creating a parody of himself. A moment like this is I Am a God, where obviously he wants to embrace himself. He wants to love himself in this moment. But he also, I think he is acknowledging the absurdity of celebrity and of geniusness. And I think he is genuinely this egotistical. But I think he's also acknowledging that it's kind of funny that he's this egotistical. This track is featuring God. Like, can we just take a moment to acknowledge that that's hilarious? Like, and I Am a God featuring God. I mean, come on, that summarizes the whole energy of this album. It's so anarcho. It's so goofy.
Narco is the
Um,
perfect word. And I think what you
yeah,
said about the self-righteousness of the discourse around this, even if this album is dumb and he's outright for all of this, isn't that fucking fun? Like this, if he just 100% believes all of this stuff that he has danced around now in my beautiful dark twisted fantasy and a bit on graduation, I think it is so I don't know quite yet which one I believe it is. I do think this has things to say, and I do think there is fun to it. But there is nothing wrong with taking an artist who just takes himself completely seriously, and enjoying that ego.
mm,
I don't get why someone taking themselves this seriously has to be like, oh, no, I'm too good for that. If it sounds fucking amazing, like Black Skinhead, um, that that song is especially one of the ones that is more like your audiences are way more able to take that seriously. Not only that, but it sounds groundbreaking. I watched him
mm,
perform that live on SNL, a video. I wasn't there. Um, it was amazing. Like that man has energy, and I think, like I said before about this being bass, when he was performing that, I think you could really see what a primal place this album was coming from. Like this is really an angry album.
yeah.
Like he was even performing those screams, like kind of at the end of a lot of lines there'll be that high pitched noise. It was so effortless, in a way. And there's something so entertaining and captivating, and even the discussion around whether or not it's all real has become interesting again now. Like with My Beautiful Dark Twisted Fantasy, it was just frustrating because all of the, like you said, it was middling. Whereas in the extremes, things are obvious. Whereas when you lurk in the middle with vulgarity, you kind of open up like questions around your intentions. But by going to these extremes, he eliminates questions, and you know what he's going for. So yeah, I think this album revels in absolution, and I adore that about it.
This album is exhilarating and intoxicating. And I really want to hone in on what I was saying about this being the other side of 808s and Heartbreaks, where I found this album to be a lot more emotionally resonant in my recent listens and a lot sadder. So I'll kind of run through what I think the thematic arc of the album is. On Sight is obviously an abrasive, braggadocious, untouchable being coming forward, as is Black Skinhead. These are animalistic, rural, aggressive, manic, for the moaning, and he's owning this am possessed. Like, this is untouchable. And I think I Am a God obviously only builds on this theme. And I think he does have a sense of humor about this. You know, I just talked to Jesus. He said, "What up, Jesus?" There's no way that line isn't meant to be funny. And like, hurry up with my damn croissants. Like, he's obviously making a parody of kind of self-entitled celebrity that he is. Like, I think there's something interesting happening. And New Slaves is where thematically this album deepens. It's really important to note that in his live performances, he wears this mask where you can't see any of his facial features. And it's a completely blank mask. There's no attempt to recreate a face on this mask. And I think it's New Slaves where this becomes very clear, the kind of sonic symbolism, if you will, that Kanye uses. I think the industrial sounds are meant to symbolize this Yeezus character that we've seen in the first 3 tracks, this untouchable celebrity god thing that is emotionally just beyond us. And whenever I think soul samples are used in this album to harken back to the old Kanye, the vulnerable, real-ass dude Kanye. And I think New Slaves is the first moment where, well, we see it a bit in the first track, actually. There's this gorgeous soul sample right after the first track, and it's immediately stamped out by some industrial music. And then in New Slaves, Kanye is at his most paranoid. He's rapping about they're trying to make us new slaves. I've seen the blood on the leaves. He raps about meanwhile let me find the exact line. He raps, meanwhile the DEA teamed up with the CCA. They're trying to lock niggas up. They're trying to make new slaves. So very much this huge paranoia about systematic race oppression in America. And what I like about this is it doesn't feel random like it was in Dark Twisted Fantasy. He contextualizes it with his own place. As a wealthy black man, he talks about there's broke nigger racism, don't touch anything this sword, and there's rich nigger racism, come in, please buy more. What you want, a Bentley, a fur coat, a diamond chain, all you blacks want all the same thing, new slaves. He acknowledges that no matter what position you are on the economic ladder, there's this sort of enslavement happening with kind of commercial lies of I don't know, eating rappers up and telling them, look, you've made it, you've done it. But really, he still isn't respected. He has this line, doing fashion, I couldn't get help unless I picked the cotton myself. Like, he's aware that he's still viewed as this crazy black guy. So I think that theme of his constant fear, paranoia runs throughout the album. Being high is a constant theme in the past couple albums. Can we get much higher in Dark Fantasy? And here, being high is a metaphor for, I think, both kind of euphoria, but also there's a self-destructiveness to it. When the soul sample breaks out at the end of New Slaves, he sings, I won't end this high, not this time again. And I think there's a death connotation there, drugs, being high. He doesn't want to end that high. And then he gives in. Frank Ocean's verse comes in. So let's get too high again, too high. So you get into the Hold My Loco, which is kind of a soft, tender, droning hangover track, where he feels really emotionally engaged here as he raps about being viewed as baby girl, he's a loner, baby girl, he's a loner. There's this very empty, listless feeling to Bon Iver's I heard you need a new fad, a new stack, a new phone, a new girl. There's a sense of this commercial money life is really empty and meaningless, and I'm in it comes in with this disgusting sex song, where he tries to. There's no intimacy here, and I feel like he's trying to find meaning where there's none. He talks about careless whispers, eye fucking, biting ass, neck, ears, hair, legs, eating ass, and it's just body bits flying around. You know, your titties, let them out, free at last. Thank God Almighty, they free at last. Like
Frankenstein's monster.
Yeah, very much, and it's very clear that it's presenting sex in a very sterile, detached, and emotionless way. And later on, with a track like Guilt Trip and Send It Up, Guilt Trip, you get kind of the gorgeous Kid Cudi bit where Kid Cudi sings. If you love me so much, why did you let me go? If you love me so much, why did you let me go? In a very kind of soulful moment in the album. And it really feels like that 808's Kanye coming out, that kind of trying to reckon with memories and things going wrong and complicated emotions. And immediately he shuts that down with Send It Up, which is a very kind of droning, clubby.
I could hear MC Ride over this.
Yeah, incessant. We're gonna send this back up and it won't come down. It's like, I'm gonna stay this high forever. I don't have to think about the past. I don't have to deal with these complicated emotions. I can just be Yeezus. And you get that wonderful opener with the kind of reggae vocalist saying, "Relive in the past, your loss." Like, there's this constant refusal to actually deal with the real Kanye emotions and just stay high. And then Bound 2, which for me is like the Graduate Master of None Season 2 type ending, where you finally get an unfettered, soulful track. You finally get that soul samples throughout this album for me have been a metaphor for, that old Kanye, that sincere place, that genuine emotion, that intimacy. And here, he's got it, right? You have some optimistic lines about, how they can make it to Thanksgiving, and maybe he's found love, but this is a facade. I mean, I talked about the woman he broke up with on 808s and Heartbreaks. I talked about Alexis Pfeiffer on 808s and Heartbreaks and how down to earth she was and how she was complicated, and Kanye acknowledged that, and how she had strange feelings about his fame and it was difficult. And here she's replaced with Kim Kardashian, and I'm sure Kim's a lovely person. She's a reality TV star. She's famous for being famous.
Her surname has become an adjective that means rich and vapid.
Yeah. And where 808 deals with those complicated emotions of Alexis Pfeiffer, here the woman he's found solace in, the love he's found, is reduced to, honey, all right. That's all she says during the song. I mean, the sample is meant to be her speaking, I take it. And he's found this kind of beautiful model type person who's going to affirm him, agree with him, who's easy, uncomplicated. And this is such a sad ending to the album for me. And yeah, that's kind of the emotional arc I really feel like this album pulls off really well.
Oh, that's really well put. Like, really well put. Can I ask you a question about a specific song?
Go for it.
So, I find Blood on the Leaves really hard to reckon with. Mainly because of the sample of Strange Fruit, the like haunting Billie Holiday song. We all know what it's about. But yeah, when I looked to the lyrics... It's
about lynching, by the way, if you didn't know what it's about, if you hadn't heard it.
Yeah. I find that this album obviously is about extremes and contrasts, like you talked about, like the soul instrumentals versus being crushed by industrial drums and such. But I found the connection between the lyrics and that sample hard to be reckoned with, and that song is so about that thing, like it's so of that time and horrific. Like, what do you think he was going for there?
Yeah, I totally agree with you. I have this in my notes as well. This is one thing I talked about with Borge a lot. I really, really hate that he used that sample here. I think it's really disrespectful. I think thematically the song itself is like really interesting and really fun. But thematically, it's not fun. Thematically, it's depressing. But sonically, it's really fun. But I just wish that sample wasn't used. Like lyrically, what's happening in this track for me is he's depicting these really ugly, messy situations people are finding themselves in this kind of party life. Like he depicts kind of a breakup happening when you took your first Molly, it came out of your body running naked down the lobby screaming that you love me. There's this sort of ugly depiction of the use of drugs and a sense of losing yourself in fame and it killing you, like before the limelight tore you, before the limelight stole you. Remember, we were so young. That kind of youthful, I think Kanye and maybe if he's singing about someone else as well, that he remembers. And yeah, the last verse about like an unwanted baby in like a fair pregnancy, and he describes it as unholy matrimony, which is like I think a really cool punchline for the song. So he's obviously deconstructing that kind of sex fueled, mania fueled party life and showing the uglier sides. I still don't understand how Blood and Leaves fits into this.
Yeah, okay. I had similar thoughts. I just didn't really feel
Yeah, I wouldn't have
it
minded
was
if he's.
my place.
I wouldn't have minded if he spliced the sample in at some point in New Slaves, because I think lyrically it would fit a lot better there. And he does reference the song in New Slaves, and it's a really great moment. But yeah, that other than the eating Asian pussy and using sweet and sour sauce, that line, yeah, these are real missteps on this album. I don't know what's going on. Yeah, I can't. I wholly agree. I really dislike the use of that sample.
Right. Awesome. I mean, not awesome, but it's been cleared up.
Yeah, so that's Yeezus. Maddie, would you like to go? What were your favorite tracks? What were your least favorite tracks? And overall, would you recommend Yeezus by Kanye?
I'll start off with Hold My Liquor. I love Hold My Liquor. I want to talk about lyrics and kind of echoing some of the stuff you said about My Beautiful Dark Twisted Fantasy. This is Kanye talking about being a piece of shit really well. There's a line that really reminds me of I just watched Ingrid Goes West and she fucking scratches the shit out of Dan's car in that film. And in this the line is slightly scratch your Corolla. Okay, I smashed your Corolla. And that line is funny. Like it made me laugh. Like it's wittily delivered. But there's also like I think what humor can do is like just pathetic irony to it. Like being able to laugh about that in a song and Kanye wanting you to laugh about it in its own way is so sad. And just the name of the song in itself is such a parody of who he is. There's something about this coming right in the middle as well. It seems like I wouldn't say it's the core of the album, but it seems like such a reminder in the middle that we're dealing with a facade here.
Yeah, there's a great line at the end. Soulmates become soulless. Like there's a real acknowledgement of how empty and destructive this is.
Yeah, exactly. There's nothing essentially of permanence. He said, like, pussy had me dead, might call Tupac over. Like, he's, like, it's a joke. It's a complete joke. But at the same time, there's just nothing of meaning. Like, nothing holds any sense of reality anymore to him.
And this is a good place where, like, last time we talked about how the way he talks about women last album is interesting. It isn't the topic of conversation for him. Whereas here, I very much feel like the brutal objectification of women is something that's really called into question, whether intentionally or unintentionally, on this album.
Yeah, it's so extreme and so put in the forefront that I find it hard to see it any other way than calling it into question. I don't know if I've seen an artist who hops around in their representations of women as much as Kanye before. Maybe I've just never gone through an artist's discography in this much detail as this, but this is insane. But I think that it's just, yeah, that's the whole thing with Kanye. He's constantly calling himself and his views into question. Next up, Black Skinhead. Like, the moment I watched that live performance sold to me as one of my favorite extreme, intense Kanye songs. Which there's a rawness to this song that I absolutely adore. I feel like we don't get a lot of Kanye just completely stripped down, but these industrial drums and just him yelling his lines, and I talked about like just his anger before. It is incredibly gratifying to see someone who just spent an album incredibly waffly just release it all on this song. And I think I think the allegory of Black Skinhead is incredibly powerful. The politics he calls into question are extremely valid and yeah, contemplative. And not stupid just because he's yelling. Like we listened to punk artists in the 70s and 80s yelling, why can't we listen now?
Yeah, that's a good point. I hadn't made that connection that he's drawing on the punk movement with the title. That's, yeah, interesting.
And I feel like it's that same, like you said anarcho, punk and anarchy. This is such an anarchistic song and album. And finally, Send It Up. I mentioned this before. This is wild. I like this album is all over the place, but this genuinely took me aback. I kind of talked about how I was surprised to hear something this insane from someone this mainstream, and pull it off. This is the moment where I was just going crazy to this album, having a really on that first lip, I just had such a good time. Like, it's really nice to have this album at this point in the retrospective. I really feel like at this point now, Kanye is at the point of just where he's been working for some time and he's just putting out albums, you know? And we're getting a new experience each time, a different flavor, and I'm really enjoying it. And this was the moment where I was just, I just let loose. It's awesome.
Yeah. Two things I like to say about the track before we move on. I find the image of when Kanye says, "It's so packed, I might ride around on my bodyguard's back like Prince in the club." Such a funny image.
Yeah.
And
amazing.
Also, to add credence to how dark and sad the ending of this album is, if you take the Yeezus persona as the stone cold, iced over, refusing to feel anything, dead inside kind of image, the fact that the final line of the song is Yeezus just rose again, and then you get down to it's almost very
ominous.
Yeah, ominous.
Yeah, you have to have something there. That's too intentional. Least favorite song. Yeah, I mean, I'm blowing it through my mouth. But my least favorite song is Bound to. It's one of the least favorite songs that I don't actively dislike. I think the music video does a lot to make me dislike this, and kind of the context surrounding it as well. And it's the artifice. I didn't previously have like the idea of this kind of dark admittance of just searching for love when you have nothing. This song felt like, okay, this is how we get the life of Pablo Kanye. Of like, okay, I did the crazy thing, I should probably go back to my old sound. And Josh, you brought a really interesting angle to that of that being a part of this album, and that being,
I don't know if Kanye intended it, but yeah, that's
obviously, but yeah, death of the author and all that, you know. But then just for me on my listen, it was a departure. And not particularly a welcome one. And overall, I'm surprised because at the same time as I was expecting a crazy Kanye album that I would enjoy, there was something about it that just seemed like, okay, this could be Kanye at his worst, most self-indulgent, most meandering, and it could just be this disaster of an industrial album that actually just seems really amateur and really not. He really came out with it, this one, and really reinvigorated himself in his discography. Like I said, this feels like such a fresh start. Unfortunately, we retrospectively know that that's not the case. But God, this is such a breath of fresh air for Kanye. And it's just a fascinating thing to have in his discography. I give this a really strong recommend. I'm really loving this.
Yeah, it's great. It's I go through my favorite tracks. Before I do so, it's just awesome to be on the 6 Kanye album and still be shocked. So yeah, first favorite track, not in any particular order, of course. Black Skinhead, absolutely iconic song. So yeah, New Slaves. I talked about this a lot, so I won't go on too much about it. But yeah, I think this is a absolute banger of a track for the first half, and then one of the most gorgeous ouches I've ever heard in a song. I can't emphasize how delightful Kanye's singing is at the end of this track. It's so soulful, and Frank Ocean's aching, fragile falsetto. It's just you wouldn't expect such a lush entry
Yeah.
on this abrasive, obnoxious, industrial style album. Lastly, Guilt Trip. My least favorite track, even though I really love it, it's On Site. I just feel like this track does the industrial thing a little bit worse than the future songs coming will do. But I still really love it. Overall, I'd give this album a strong recommend. Really adore this album a lot, and I think it's a misunderstood classic. I love it. So yeah, that's it. Do you have some film for us next week, or would you like to add that in, Nathan?
Oh no, I've got my film.
Lovely. Okay. What are the film recommends for next week, Matty?
So we're gonna be talking about a new film next week, as the routine instructs us. We're gonna be talking about. I've held off delving into the darker sides of recommend for a bit. So we're delving back in. We're gonna be watching Dogs Don't Wear Pants, which is a BDSM fueled thriller. So yeah, tune in next week to hear us talk about that.
I recently watched Secretary, starring Maggie Gyllenhaal.
Oh
I
yeah,
thoroughly enjoyed both of BDSM. It was like 50 Shades of Grey, but acceptable. Like, I'm allowed to watch this. Does that make sense?
yeah. It won't destroy your opinion as a person and your integrity.
Yeah. Anyway, so that closes off the Dark Fantasy trilogy, and where we're ending off, Yeezus has risen again. He's maybe found solace in Kim Kardashian, or maybe it's just empty and shallow, like everything else in this album, which he clearly loves. And we'll see if the God era, Kanye's going to be looking for salvation. He's going to be looking for a return to something genuine, something warm, and we'll see if he gets that. So join us next time after the film review, when we'll be returning to the life of Pablo and then talking about Ye, the next chapter in Kanye's career. So
Awesome, can't wait.
Yeezy season approaching. Catch you later, everyone. Bye bye.
Thanks for listening. Bye.